we'll go ahead and get started, Krishna, and I'll continue to admit people to the event as they enter the waiting room. But thank you, everyone, for attending today's TiE Talk. We're very pleased to have Scott with us. A quick introduction of myself. My name is Teresa Leatherow, and I am the newly appointed Executive Director for the TiE Pittsburgh chapter. So it's great to be with all of you today for my first TiE Talk. Before we get started, I would just like to thank our sponsors. As always, our gold, silver, bronze, and academic sponsors make all of our programming possible. So we'd like to especially thank SWAT Capital LLC, Benchmark and PNC, the Payroll Shop, Cohen and Company, as well as Accelerant, ANSYS, and Ference and Associates. And now, just as a quick reminder, I think everyone's already meeting my protocol. If you could just stay on mute while Krishna is running the show here with Scott, we will wait till the appropriate time for the Q&A portion. And then, of course, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Krishna Pendiala, who will be moderating our talk this afternoon. Krishna?
Thank you, Teresa. Just 1 second. Let me stop the screen share and get this show on the road. Welcome again, everybody, and congrats, Teresa, for being our newest executive director.
Thank you, Krishna.
All right, so welcome to our first TiE Talk of 2021. And now that 2020 is behind us, I bet we can all take a moment to breathe a sigh of relief. What a year that was. And I'm sure Scott will also share how it impacted him in all his activities last year. And I'm so grateful to Scott for accepting my invitation, mainly because I couldn't think of a better person for thinking about two pearls of wisdom because of my knowing Scott's work, both as a professional and his personal and as a philanthropist. So I just thought, and I'm grateful that he accepted our invitation because, as I said, I'm hoping that we're going to get some unique stories. I've had the privilege of knowing Scott in two very different settings. The first was in 2013 when we were starting a foundation to help the returning servicemen and women from the wars of Afghanistan and Iraq. Scott was the first person to support our work in helping them. So I want to thank you again, Scott, for your support then. And then 5 years later, I met him in a very different setting. I had a chance to help him teach a course called True North Leadership at his amazing facility in the Redwoods in Scotts Valley near Santa Cruz. I call it Scotts Valley because it's Scotts Valley, right? That's where he set up this beautiful place. And everyone who's attended that program, their lives have been transformed. And I can attest to that because I'm in touch with 7 people, and it's going to be 15 months since they attended, and the difference it has made in his life. I'd really ask you to look into that. The key thing about Scott that always interested me and excited me was his authenticity, and it's difficult to find Scott's level of authenticity in leaders these days. In fact, first of all, when I asked him to give a 20-minute talk, he said, you know what, if I prepare, then it won't be from the heart. But then we were going to make it an interview, and then today something happened. So I don't know what Scott's going to share based on his experiences and realizations, both professionally and personally. Again, I'm honored and thrilled to get to meet these cool people through TiE Talks, and I hope you'll enjoy our talk as well. So please join me in welcoming Scott Kriens, Chairman of Juniper Networks and co-founder of 1440. Welcome, Scott.
Well, hello, Krishna. Thank you for the kind invite. And Teresa, congratulations as well to your new role. Happy birthday to you, Krishna, yesterday. Thank you, Shivani, being here all the way from Delhi. Hello, Atul. I really appreciate the chance to share with all of you. And as Krishna said, I was challenged once, it's been about 2 years ago, by somebody. I was on my way to give a talk, and she said, don't give talks you've already given, because by definition, it's tired. And how can it be authentic if you've already done it? And obviously it doesn't mean make up stuff that you've never said, but it just struck me to throw out the preparedness of it all and just talk with a few kind of words in mind. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll try not to babble, and then we can share some questions and thoughts. I'm deliberately sitting outside here. I'm in Northern California, and it's alive with springtime. And it feels like this coming out of hibernation and winter and darkness for all the reasons we all know of. And I'm so tired of everybody listing them all off before they say anything. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to move on. But I will borrow a quote I read a couple days ago. It's not a quote really, what it is. It's a long poem really by a guy named Parker Palmer. And he wrote about springtime and the change of seasons. And he said, one of the things I notice most about springtime, and he lives in the further north, kind of center of the country, but in the north, where it gets cold and it gets nasty in the wintertime. And he said, one of the things I notice about spring is before the blossoms and before all the beauty is the mud so sticky and so deep that it pulls the boots off my feet. And so springtime's got this feel to me that is worth celebrating, that I think we're, it doesn't just magically turn into buds and blossoms. It does quite reliably, but it's also preceded by mud that you can't get your boots out of. And it feels like we're kind of celebrating all of that, and especially out here in California. The thing I wanted to talk about, I actually picked a couple things. They aren't so much professional versus personal, because one of the other things that it was said to me once a long time ago by Jim Barksdale, who's going all the way back to like early AOL days and browser days. He said, there's no such thing as a professional life and a personal life. There's just life. Things happen. It wouldn't be the best idea probably to come home to our partners and lay out a bunch of metrics for success. And it would be an even worse idea to take all of our personal needs to the office. That would get us fired in today's world, and rightfully so. But at the same time, there's only one of us, and there's only one life, and it doesn't separate so easily, nor should it. And the attempt to do that, to me, is a bifurcation that's dangerous. But I do have a couple thoughts on two different subjects. One of them is, it could be called leadership, although that tends to sound more professional. And I think we lead and are led by people that surround us in workplaces. And I feel very much led by my children as much as I try and show up for them and so on. So I guess you could put it under, I'll put it under the heading of leadership, but here's the thoughts that I had about it is, there's an old-fashioned model of it, which I would call the telling model. Just, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. And it was kind of born for me with this image of the captain of the ship in the storm and the rowers. And they had to believe that the captain knew exactly what was going to happen in this storm, because if they ever lost confidence and stopped rowing, then the ship would be adrift and it'd be turned broadside to the waves and sink. And so the captain had to sound this note of absolute confidence and tell the rowers what to do, or the ship would be lost. And even if the captain had no idea what to do and couldn't possibly have known what the storm would bring. So there's a telling model that's, I think, way out of date. And the thing that struck me lately that is most important is subtle. And at the simplest level, I'd call it modeling. And we have to, all we can hope to do is model. And the thing that is important about that to me is that I don't believe that people follow what others say. They follow what they do. And so we have to be really thoughtful about that and model what we believe, because there's some sort of thing that happens. I won't pretend to describe it exactly, but in words, but there's an osmosis or kind of an ingestion that happens by virtue of how people show up, that we either admire or not, and respect, and then in turn model for others and so forth. And that that to me is a better form of is a more likely way of expecting to actually impact somebody, as opposed to have something just kind of bounce off them like lots of other intellectual blah 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 stuff. But there's a subtlety in the modeling part too, which is what I call space holding or way showing, which is allowing for others, holding space for others to show up. And in that, we learn from them because they model for us, but also it allows each of the participants, doesn't have to be one-on-one, to share in a connected relationship. And this space holding for others is not easy to do, because we are, especially in the professional sense, and especially as entrepreneurs and people that have had success, as those on this call have had, we think, and we are problem solvers. And so when someone shows up, we want to say, well, here's 2 things you can do about that, or here's what I think, and almost like we're not serving if we're not problem solving. And sometimes space holding is just listening, and people actually only solve problems on their own anyway. I always tell people my best advice is don't take anybody else's advice. Listen, take other people's opinions, but then follow your own advice and make your own decision. And so this space holding thing is a really subtle and sometimes hard thing to do, because we feel deficient if that's all we do. Or I shouldn't say we, I don't want to project this on anybody else. That I do that. And there's a subtlety in the modeling which is not comfortable either. And these are the things I've been thinking. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday, is that in order to model, we actually have to show up and share aspects of ourselves. And that can be uncomfortable because we don't, because we feel vulnerable or we don't want to do that. And that's one of the hurdles to authenticity, is vulnerability. And some of these words, I'm actually tired of them. They get used so much these days. There's authentic fans in the baseball park and so forth. It gets used everywhere. But so there's one thing to get over in modeling, which is actually showing up with your real self and your real problems, and not just the ones, not like, oh, here's my modeling talk, but instead, here's something I'm really struggling with. Or here's what I really worry about in this storm, is whether we're going to drown, and whether we should go north or east to try and get out of it, and so forth. And but there's another dimension of modeling that for many people, I'll say for myself, that's even harder, which is thinking, which is talking about myself. Thinking that, well, people didn't come here to listen to me talk about myself. They came here for their own reasons, and to hear and talk about what's important. And, if I just stand up here and talk about myself, then what's anybody going to learn or take away from that? And I'm trying to learn to push through that barrier. And the subtlety is not to overdo it. Because I think, without a political commentary behind it, I'll just say that I think all of us are sick and tired of narcissism. And so it's certainly easy to overdo it, right? But sitting behind a wall and not sharing, or feeling like, gosh, I don't have the ego. I don't need to do that. It's not about me. It's about helping others and all that stuff. And true. And it's important to share our own challenges, because people want to know people want to know about other people. And I think they learn more by seeing what other people process and do and worry about and problem solve or whatever, or just ponder, than they do any sort of script or any sort of canned thing. So anyway, I've been having that conversation with some people about really what's the second, third, fourth level of showing up in a way that my friends, my coworkers, my children can participate in and be part of. And then in the space holding that gives me an opportunity to learn from them at the same time. And that mutuality and the subtle balance of mutuality is I guess it's the place I'll leave this point. And if it's interesting, we can talk some more about it. I don't have any answers, but I've been pondering a lot. The other thing is, I don't know how much this will be of interest, but it's on the personal side, is something I've been wrestling with and I've not really ever like laid it out. So I'll try and do this really quickly. And then if it's interesting, we can talk about it. What is it's sort of like, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose? What's important? And there's plenty of answers to that. And the answers are individual for each person. And there's lots of things we do that give us purpose and meaning and so forth. And I'm trying to, and then 1440, which we can talk about also, but trying to distill down to what's the currency in that realm? What's the coin of that realm? And I am convinced that it is energy. And so what I've been trying to do is figure out, how do I weed through in my life to sort of prune to get to doing only the things which give me energy as best I can, and not the things that drain energy from me. And I actually think that's the thing that I need to get better at managing if I want to live a more full life. It's not time, it's not money. I mean, it is sort of, or eventually it is at some level, but at the root, at the nucleus of the atom in this thing, it's energy. And so how do you get there? You can't just, I don't know how to just say, I'm going to be energetic, or I'm energized. I'm just going to choose that. I do think, and maybe I'll just pause here. I don't know how long you want me to babble on about this, Krishna, before we go to questions, but I think there's some things that are indirect, and energy is one of those. I don't know how to go out and actually do energy, or be energetic just as a declaration. But there's a path to it. And I just read recently a book that many here may have read. It's an old book. It's by Viktor Frankl. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And what Frankl says in there is one of the primary paths is creativity. And I have long thought that, and I've been thinking about that in the context of 1440, and if 1440 is a place that people come to, and our goal there is to have people leave with more energy than they came with. So how do you do that? Well, when we're creative, I believe it energizes us. It energizes me when I feel creative. And obviously that could take all kinds of forms. Art, music, and so forth are obvious ones, but just problem solving and thinking through something, be creative with a spreadsheet. So it doesn't matter what it is, it's to each of us a personal thing. But if I can engage myself creatively, that gives me energy. And thinking about this talk, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we can go on with whatever. The selfish reason that I wanted to give this talk was just to force myself to create some construct around some of the things I've been thinking about so I could articulate it. And that brings me with energy to this moment, this present moment right here, because it gives me energy to try and to crystallize some of these things that have been on my mind. So I think I have other thoughts about energy and as it relates to presence and gratitude and things like that, that if we want to, we can get more into it. But the essence of it is, personally for me, the denomination, the currency that matters most to me is energy. And how do I pay attention to that? How do I become intentional about making that a priority in a way that that feeds me, that leaves me with more of it than I came with? And we all do all kinds of things. I'd imagine, Ray, you talked about being at the food bank. I bet leaving that place, you do that with more energy than you showed up with. So we all have ways, and they're all, everyone's as good as the next. I'm just trying to be much more intentional about putting more of it in my life on purpose, because I think it makes everything else feel more possible. That's the evidence of it is everywhere around us today. Here, springtime is loaded with energy, and it feeds me. So let me pause, Krishna, so I don't use up our time with my thoughts of the day, and open it up to any collection of conversation that would be helpful.
First of all, thank you, Scott. It's a beautiful way you started with spring and came a full circle back to spring through using energy. And interestingly, I use an acronym that says EAT well. EAT standing for E for energy, A for attention, and T for time, in that order. But we usually don't allocate it that way. We go look at our calendars and plug in meetings and so on, using time as the primary metric, when really, if you don't have any energy, or if you're incapable of paying attention, what good is it giving time to any activity for that matter? So I do agree with you. Hey, we mentioned 1440 for many times, and I know what it stands for, but I'm curious why you chose 1440 and the significance of that.
Well, 1440 is the name of our foundation. It was actually named by Joni, my wife, and it's named for the number of minutes in a day. As Christian knows, having been there and taught with me there, it's an effort to create a space, a place where people can come and have an experience, as I said, that the end of which they can leave with more energy than they came with. And one of the ways to do that is by being present. It's another one of those really, in the now and present, and Eckhart Tolle, and it's a really I'm not picking on Eckhart Tolle, I like his books, but it's a very well-worn label, but it's no less important because of that. And for us, one of the keys to bringing creativity and joy and energy to life is to be present. And 1440 just reminds us that there's that many opportunities and more every day to do it.
Thank you, Scott. So this is a trick question. Were you always like this, or did something happen that made a switch in your outlook?
One big thing happened to me, which was now it's 17 years ago in January, which is when I lost my father. And I just had this pause, which was, I always say about it, it was this confrontation with mortality, and it brought about this question, what matters? And I started looking around at all the stuff I was doing, and widgets and earnings calls and quarterly results, and some of the things I was doing, and for that matter, some of the ways I was living the rest of my life didn't pass that test. So I've been on the search ever since, but it really did redirect my life in a fundamental way. And it's one of the reasons I center on today, even that many years later, still in quest. I don't have the answer to the question, but I do think energy has a lot to do with it. And I just was very much asleep at the wheel until I was 45.
Wow. First of all, I appreciate you sharing that personal experience. Now, you made another comment about we are all problem solvers, and many of people in this call are type A personalities, and we're always in a hurry to solve problems. One of the things, Scott, I want your opinion on this. I find that too many leaders sacrifice effectiveness in the pursuit of efficiency. Have you ever thought about that? Any ideas around that?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. Effectiveness in the
They-
pursuit
they
of efficiency.
sacrifice effectiveness in the pursuit of efficiency, trying to get things done quickly.
I never thought of that framing, actually. I think there is a tendency, perhaps sometimes, I know I'm guilty of it sometimes, just wanting to process, wanting to clear my list. I always started with my mail by doing all the easy stuff first, just to get the list of 200 messages or whatever it was down to 10 or 20. The problem was then I ran out of energy doing all the stuff that didn't matter. So I'm not sure that's what you're talking about, but I think we can fall in love with metrics that sometimes aren't maybe the best.
Mm. As I said, I didn't have any particular angle. I just wanted to get your take on it. So we have folks, please share your questions. I have one. So this is from Ray Milham. It says, what's the best event you had at Juniper and what was the most challenging event at Juniper?
I'd say the best event I had, or we had, certainly one of them was a group, they're called the Unreasonable Group. I don't know if anyone has heard of them. It's, they operate out of Colorado. And there was, I think, 17 entrepreneurs there that were doing the most amazing things. And the reason they're called that is because they're people that, mostly young people, not entirely, who just do, they're figuring out how to get clean water. One lady was a doctor and she's figuring out how to 3D print something that can be grafted onto an artery and put into the body. And just unbelievable work and just so inspiring and off the charts. Can't even imagine how they're. It's another one. I was just actually listening to a video for them that they were doing a couple months ago. This woman in Atlanta, she's figured out a way to go to restaurants, take their food, excess food. She got a whole system designed online to give them credit for the food, to turn it into a tax deduction to reduce their income for tax benefits. So they get paid for the food they used to throw away. And then of course she goes and distributes it. So, and it's all done online and she goes and collects it and it's all put into the system and out comes your receipt and you get credit for how many pounds of whatever, and just, super thoughtful ways. And they're all trying to solve social problems with the innovation. And all of them, a bunch of them came to the campus, and with them came then several investors that were being pitched, and the whole group was just energized by each other. So that was fantastic. One of the more, so I won't name a group by name, but one of the more difficult experiences of the campus is having people come and talk about mindfulness and gratitude and compassion, and then be nothing like that to our staff. And that happens too. I guess it's the real world. There's people in all dimensions, I guess. This is going to sound really like not a positive energy thing to say, but there's people that just are mailing stuff in. They have the seminar or the weekend or the whatever, and it is the same pitch they've been doing for 15 years, and they don't really model it, and they're not really present with it, and they just give it and collect the tuition. So whenever that happened, I felt like I was wasting my time, and that did happen. So it's been both.
Wow. So this is a segue. I've been asked this question by a few folks. Can you, and in fact, Ray was asked the same question, can you be a good guy and run a company successfully?
The predictable answer to that is yes, of course. And there's all kinds of, one of the things I really have come to disdain are simplistic intellectual answers to stuff that's easy to say and actually really hard to do. So there's plenty of answers to that question that are easy to say. You know, showing up, I don't even bother reciting. We all could do that. Scott McNeely is a friend of mine that ran Sun Microsystems for a long time, and he said something once early on when I was becoming a CEO that I never forgot. Was he said the only decisions that come to my desk are, do you want to cut off your arm or your leg? And if it was a toe or a finger, it would have been done before it got to me. And yet somebody has to make those decisions, and either it's not the right thing for anybody else to do it. It's not like people are ducking it necessarily. It's perhaps not the right thing to be done at any other level. So I wonder sometimes if you were a political leader and you've got these really smart people, and you're trying to calculate what's the course of action that's most appropriate for 65 or 70% of the people. And you have to live with the reality that in today's media, and actually just the fact that anybody can publish to the whole world with a keystroke, you know, that's an incredible power. And in my opinion, it also is really dangerous or difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because almost no matter what is decided by a leader at a high level of anything complex, leaves somebody disadvantaged because of it. You know, it's the arm or your leg problem. And then with media and the desire to sensationalize and to raise the ratings on their news shows and all of that, or that creates the most interesting conversation within a company, is about the aggrieved, the person whose leg had to be cut off. I should probably quit using that analogy. But anyway, that whoever is disadvantaged by the fact that you have to make real decisions in an imperfect world that are harmful to some people. And that used to just be something that happened more quietly. And I'm not saying that was better, but now it's overcorrected the other way. So we can now find the person who is disadvantaged, or for whom the consequence was unfavorable, and elevate it to be the headline and make it seem like the leader consciously disregarded that person. And it's because it's being compared to an impossible ideal, which is the decision that 100% of the people are happy with. And so I think trying to be a good person in a leadership capacity is something that we can only develop from an internal perspective that incorporates imperfect reality. And I'm a good person because only 10%, and this is more of a political reality perhaps than it is a company, but the lesser percentage of people were disadvantaged and harmed by my decision. The engineers that had their project canceled after putting their heart and soul into it for 2 years because I went out and bought something because it was more competitive. I'm doing them a favor by not having them put more years into something that's not going to be good enough. It's painful. It's hard. Probably the right thing to do. Stuff like that, we can be good people, but we have to live with the reality that that's not going to be the way it's seen by a fair percentage of people in anything complex that we're asked to lead, in my opinion.
Wow, that was a pretty interesting response, Scott. I have another one, which I thought might be coming, and you mentioned about modeling and space holding. And Atul wanted to know, he can see how space holding can be used with employees, but can that be used even with customers? Because they're always in problem-solving mode and in a hurry.
Carefully, I think the answer is yes. It's probably not the thing to try and redirect them when they're in front of a group of their peers or the people that work for them. It'd be interesting, to the degree we can do this, to create, I'll just borrow this example because it's one a friend of mine was using yesterday, and he's working on a particular thing, but he said, you know, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create one-on-one opportunities with the principals in order to delve into the question below the questions,
Mhm.
which is what, in his case, what are you afraid of? You know, he's working on a challenge with philanthropy, and the philanthropists are saying, well, gosh, isn't if I build 28 schools, isn't that good? After all, 28's a big number and schools are a good thing. And like, yeah, that makes you feel better to build 28 schools. But is that really the problem? If you just pop up these schools in these parts of the world, is that the answer? Or is that just something that makes you feel good? And if your fear is, what if my philanthropic efforts fail? Well, let's deal with that fear and let's figure out, how do we advance the needs of children in the world? How do we create opportunities for children to reach their potential? Building a school might be one answer, but there's your fear of doing something bolder that might fail let's get at what you're afraid of and not just find the simple answers. So, and that's space holding for somebody that may not take us up on it, right? That doesn't always work. It takes two people to participate in it, but trying to create the environment with the customer and saying, and trying to understand, it may not be the right thing to ask them the question outright. Maybe they think, you're not there to be my therapist, but sitting there trying to, what is this person really about and where are they coming from? And I always would say to people, this is employees more than customers really, but let's not kid ourselves that the reason we come here is because the thing we care about most is the company. The thing we care about most is putting our kids through college and living healthy lives of our own. And this is a means to an end. So let's understand that first and not create some false narrative. And then let's try and understand what would help you do that. Maybe the solution I have for you is it, maybe it isn't, or maybe, anyway, I think it's important to get below the surface of the obvious, no matter who you're talking to. And it's usually necessary to be careful about how to hold that space or create an environment to invite people into it. And then the reality is not everyone's going to take us up on that. And maybe we have no right to judge that being good or bad, but we can at least create the invitation.
Thank you. Dawn has a question. She says she's not very creative, but I know, Dawn, she is creative, but she says she gets her energy from giving and of her time, her experience, and her failures. Can you talk about serving others as a source of energy?
It's a great source of energy. I think what I've tried to explore personally in that sense is, what is that tapping inside of me? Because, and this is, Dawn, please don't take this as a commentary in any way about anybody except me, but sometimes I give because it makes me feel good. And am I really helping? And often the answer is yes. If we're working at the food bank, or we're donating money to a cause, or we're spending our time mentoring, or it's always helping. It's usually almost always helpful. But I try and pause, I guess, and ask myself, why? It's like the 5 whys. Why am I doing that? And what is it? Is the reason I'm doing it? And it's not that it's being selfish has got a really bad connotation, unfortunately, because I think giving, if it makes me feel better, is a perfectly good reason to give. And if it brings me energy to do it, and I take that energy into the rest of my life, all good. There's none of it's bad. I think it's important for me, at least, to drill down into, why am I doing that? And why do I feel that way? And why is that my answer? And not to find something to do instead of giving. Maybe it's just to get better at it. But usually there's something below the surface for me that's worth understanding, that if I don't try, I gloss over. And then I wish I'd have, I think later, I wish I'd have thought more about it. It isn't to take away anything from the gift of giving to others. That's usually at the center of giving and sharing, I think is probably one of those tenets that's very basic about energy to begin with.
Thank you, Scott. Talking about energy and so on, I liked one sentence in your professional bio that Dusty sent me, which said there's a loud need for quiet time. I like catchphrases. So the loud need for quiet time. So can you share something about your perspective? And also, I think that might have been also motivation to start 1440 in the Redwoods.
I share that in the context of something that I learned from a doctor that's also a friend that has been a caregiver of ours for maybe even 20 years now, 15 or 20 years. He says a couple different things that are important. He's very holistic, but he's also an MD and a very science-driven guy. He's like a Rain Man. It's amazing how he thinks about things. But he says a couple things. What's important in life is rhythm, breathing, movement, and silence. Rhythm in our lives, which can be yoga, physical exercise, walking, lovemaking. There's all kinds of ways to experience rhythm. Breathing and movement is really important, but so is silence. And there's medical reasons for it that you could translate in terms of cortisol and stress and so forth, and he does that very quantitatively. But there's also a settling of that in its impact, not just on our outlook, but on our health. From a health perspective, he also he has tenets around that. One is obviously exercise, and he has a whole belief on how you should do that. And another is eating well, and he's got a whole set of opinions about that. And the third is sleep hygiene. So it's exercise, diet, sleep, and contemplation is his fourth. It's another way of saying the thing he said earlier. And when he talks about that, the influence of, you call it contemplation or silence, but just quiet time to engage. If he were talking about it scientifically, he would just be talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. Animals can be in a fight for their life and be asleep 2 hours later. It's amazing because they don't live in that mode. And we have a tendency, if you're talking about it scientifically, to live in this fight or flight, and there's all been a lot written and said about that. Silence and contemplation, which could be, obviously, can be any religious pursuit, can be yoga, can just be a walk in nature. He certainly doesn't, and I certainly don't have any prescription for what constitutes it. But the time to gather and settle our body and mind and spirit is, he would tell you and quantitatively define it, central to our health and mitigating disease and living long lives. And I also personally believe it gives me a place to live from when I can stay there. And I can't stay there. I fail. I get sucked into stuff. I bite hooks all the time. Oh my gosh, what about whatever? And then I return. And one of my teachers talked about that, if it's in meditation, but it could be anything, just trying to return to presence and to silence. Because silence in the mind is hard to come by, and it's fleeting. But he said, every time, just think of it as an exercise in returning. And every time you return, it's like doing a rep in the gym. So it's all in the outlook. If I frustrate myself because I can't stay in silence because my mind chatters away, or I can't stay in the present moment because I obsess about yesterday or tomorrow or whatever, instead of bemoaning all of that, just treat it as an opportunity for a rep and just come back and return and return and return and return. And each time I do that, I'm a little stronger. And I know it's going to happen again, which means I'll just do it again and I'll get a little bit stronger. It's a worthwhile pursuit in my mind. And my doctor, Mike's his name, would tell you medically, clinically, quantitatively, it's a path to a longer, healthier life too.
Awesome. This is an interesting question I just got. Have you had any connection study with ancient Hindu philosophy, especially karma yoga? If so, what are your thoughts on its connection with finding energy?
I have not. I am no scholar of these. There's so many ancient and long, centuries standing practices. I'm a very amateur beginner Qigong practitioner, and I get exposed to different philosophies and approaches at a very casual level. But whether it's prana or chi or hara, to me, just speaking as the sort of clinical Westerner, ignorant Westerner person, but trying to apply some probability, what are the chances that thousands of years ago, when there was little or no connection of any fundamental type that we know of between so many different philosophies and religions and beliefs and practices, what are the chances that it's random that when prana or chi or hara or life force gets spoken about in these different traditions, that there's not something fundamentally true about it? Is it really a coincidence that people sort of came about to things that sound so similar, at least to the uninformed, to the casual learner today? I don't think so. It evolved in so many different cultures in ways that feel so similar. And to me, that's why, when I think of it in terms of prana or chi, it's energy, and that's just my Western word for it, being central is a millennia old belief that's just too persistent and too pervasive to disregard. Said in the positive, we should all take advantage of the learnings that have come before us, map them into our own lives in our own ways, put them into the 21st century. But boy, there's a lot to revere about the masters and what they talked about that makes a lot more sense than trying to reinvent it all, other than personalizing it for ourselves.
Perfect. Thank you. So another thing that you have been quoted is, we've been told from our early days to go out into the world and discover who we are and what we want to be. There's a lot to learn out there, but only when we look within will we find the answers we are looking for. Could you expand and reflect on that for us, please?
It came from a pursuit I undertook after my dad passed, and I was realizing there was a bunch of stuff I was doing that I didn't really pass the test of what matters. And so I was looking around and I couldn't figure out what did. So I thought, well, I'll just eliminate all the stuff that doesn't, and I'll be left with whatever's standing. And after a couple of years of trying to do that, I realized I'm going to die long before I could possibly do this by process of elimination. There's way too many, that's not going to work. So it's not out there. And in the simplistic way, which is probably all it deserves, that I think that for me, what matters is when I stop living like this and start living like that, and living from the inside out and trying to listen, feel for, it's not even a head thing. I've spent way too much time in my head, but it's trying to get into the felt, intuitive sense of what matters. I'm reading a great book right now. It's by a guy named Ian McGilchrist, and it's called The Master and His Emissary. talks about the two hemispheres of the brain, and it's a neurobiological breakdown of how our right and left hemispheres work. And I live in it, which debunks a bunch of the simplistic things that at least I used to think about the two. But it also is teaching me a lot right now about where to live from. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's inside, but what does that mean? And if you're interested in the book, it's a great read. And it's once you get inside, now what? And because I think all of us, it's easy to say, you know, well, it doesn't matter, you don't take it with you, and having all the stuff in the world. I actually think more stuff is worse than less stuff these days. But that's, I mean, that's not there's nothing new about that. And even the idea that we should be looking around for what really, where our satisfaction comes from and all that. It's the more subtle part of those kinds of things are, what is that? Okay, but what does that actually translate to? What does that mean? How do I action that? How do I live that? After the simple observation, what's the graduate course in finding it inside? And so, yeah, I think that what you said, what I wrote or wherever that's true. And then the work starts.
It's interesting you stated that, because recently, I don't know if you had a chance to read the book Chatter by Ethan Kross, and he talks about his dad telling him all along when he was growing up, go inside, go inside, go inside, but nothing more. And so he, when asked, will he tell that to his children? In one of the interviews I watched him, he said, no, I will not do that, because, and then what is the question? So Scott, could you repeat the name of the book you just mentioned?
Oh, it's called The Master and the Emissary. And the author's name is Ian McGilchrist.
Thank you very much. All right, folks, we are right on time. And thank you very much. And Scott, if you could just stay back a couple of minutes, I wanted to introduce you to a friend. And thanks again for joining us for our first TiE Talk. And Scott, thank you so much for sharing from the heart.
Thanks. It's good to be with all of you, and best to everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Scott.
Amen.
Thank you.
Best
Have a
wishes.
great day.
Bye.
Thank you,
you.
guys.